Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Ruth Ann Harpur. Ruth is a clinical psychologist. She's an expert in relationships, different relationship dynamics, and different personality types. She also has a popular YouTube channel, which I've been on once or twice, where she talks about the different issues that come up in relationships and so on, and different ways to navigate them. Hello, Ruth.
Hello, Darren. Thank you for having me.
No problem. I suppose my first question, an obvious question, is what led you into the line of work that you do?
Oh God, I just think whether it's my own personal life or the people I've worked with, that the quality of relationships is so determinative of the quality of your life. So that's kind of why I'm interested in it. It's kind of why I do what I do. So that's what's led me to that particular leaning. And then I think there's also having seen a lot of content about relationships that, yeah, maybe I don't quite agree with. And so I wanted to put out something that's maybe a little more nuanced and maybe a little more pragmatic and a little more, I think, appreciative of the complexity of human relationships. So that's why I started making social media content.
Yeah, you're right. Relationships doesn't matter who they're with. It's your next door neighbor, the people you work with, your partner, your family, even. There are lots of different kinds of relationships and many different nuances. There's a lot of different personality types, and sometimes with the different personalities, our upbringing, belief systems, things like that, sometimes these can cause a little bit of contention. But in a healthy relationship, I think what makes it work is the art of negotiation, the art of trade-offs, and things like that.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about difficult relationships, toxic relationships, people who come out of the relationships, and a lot of people who are watching a lot of stuff on YouTube, listen to podcasts and so on, and they're talking about the different experiences they've had, the obstacles they have to recovery. Sometimes it feels as if they're still stuck there.
Mhm.
There's like something they're maybe trying to undo, something they're trying to fix. I'm just wondering, in your experience, what sort of obstacles have you noticed, have you come up with?
So you talking about people leaving relationships where there's been quite a lot of abuse,
Hmm.
whether that's emotional abuse or physical abuse or financial abuse or sexual abuse. Yeah. Well, I think there's lots of things. I think there's the impact that those relationships have on how you see yourself,
Hmm.
how they color your perception of yourself, that often in relationships, people are getting a message and absorbing the message, things are my fault. There's something wrong with me. There's something inadequate about me. Um, and I think that really colors people's view of themselves, and that can often carry forward after the relationship. And likewise, the view of other people. So their view of other people can't be trusted, other people can't be relied on. But also sometimes the reverse of that too, where it's like, I'm looking for someone else to rescue me, to save me, or I'm going to be totally independent. I'm not going to have anything to do with this relationship nonsense ever again.
Mm.
So there's the kind of how we respond to those experiences can really color our experiences of future relationships. And then, of course, and this is not about blaming people, but there are vulnerabilities that can lead someone into those relationships, like a previous experience of abuse, like the experience of abuse in a family, where sometimes people are drawn into those relationships. Maybe there's a familiarity, maybe there's a kind of a discomfort and a not really knowing what to do in a healthier relationship. And sometimes I think people are trying to, it's almost a strange thing because I almost feel like it's very psychodynamic to say it, but you see how people get drawn into like repeating something about their parents' relationship, and it's almost like it's a desire to resolve it.
It's
You
sometimes
know?
referred to as unfinished business,
Yeah, yeah,
something
absolutely.
this person. Yeah.
There's a phrase, I think Terry Rail says it, we marry our unfinished business.
Mm.
No, so, and I'm thinking about a sort of classic example where someone's mum is never good enough for their father, never. measures up, is constantly being criticized, and they are drawn to a relationship with a highly demanding partner.
Mm.
And it's almost like I can earn his respect, his admiration, his recognition. Somehow I've accomplished something my mother couldn't accomplish. And
There
it's
is,
like, ah, wrong partner.
there is another side to that in the sense that sometimes someone might meet someone who is
Mm,
very vulnerable,
yes.
or rather appears to be very vulnerable. And there's something in them they're trying to rescue. Again, it's that sense of unfinished business. I can bring out the best in you. When I bring out the best in you, you'll see the best in me.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I think sometimes that almost seems to be like an attempted, I'm going to make myself needed,
Mm,
because if I can make myself needed, then I'm not going to get abandoned.
mm.
But I'm also never going to know I'm wanted. So yeah.
The thing with really, I mean, human beings as a whole, we are social creatures. It's why we have relationships, live in communities,
Yeah.
join clubs and groups and things like that. And a lot of the time, how we see ourselves, I think anyway, I believe, is reflected in those around us. You know, when we put the word self in front of things like esteem, confidence, things like that, I think a lot of the times it's not so much what I think of me, it's what I think others think of me. And you're in a relationship with a partner who is continually demanding, wants more, wants you to sacrifice more and more, but they're constantly criticizing and it's never enough. Of course, our self-esteem, our self-confidence, our sense of self-worth is going to plummet.
Hmm. It can't do anything else.
Mm. And you're right, that can leak into other areas. I mean, even someone still within that, they go into work, it might leak out there as well. They start to doubt their own capabilities.
Yeah.
They might start to find it difficult to speak up for themselves in meetings and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it can play out in so many ways. I think it's very individual. You can also get the almost the overcompensating. I will be hyper autonomous in work. I will be hyper performing. Um, but I can never ever admit when I'm having a really tough day.
But even when you do get someone who's hyper performing, again, it's that need for validation and
Yeah.
recognition and things like that. When they're hyper
Yes.
performing, it's trying to get that from the people
Yes.
around them. They're still
Exactly.
low in confidence and esteem, but they're trying to get some kind of positive regard that they're not getting from, if you think about it, who is supposed to be the closest person to them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And coming out of that, as I said, you know, a lot of people find themselves stuck. There can be different things going on. I think the biggest one, and maybe it isn't, but I think it's the biggest in the sense that it's the one that I hear most about, is the need for some sense of fairness, the need for some kind of recognition, if you will, the need for some kind of justice.
Yeah, that often doesn't come. I think this is a thing that, it's sort of like these things are really complicated. I think there is the sort of the impact it has on how you see yourself,
Mhm.
how you see other people, how that affects your relationships going forward, the ways that you cope to develop, the ways you develop in order to cope with that, whether that's I'm going to be really placating and pleasing, or I'm going to be really defensive and I'm going to keep people at a distance, or I'm going to find a partner who I can rescue so I don't have to fear being abandoned. But then I think when people really recognize that they have been mistreated and they have been abused in a relationship, there's often a desire that I want justice for this.
Mhm.
I want the other person to acknowledge what they did.
Yeah.
And that almost never happens.
It's like it's believing your recovery is dependent on the other person.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I think that's also a feature of the relationship too, in that I wanted this other person's recognition and admiration and praise and closeness, and now they got to admit they didn't give it to me. And that rarely happens, right? Because they also have their need often to see themselves as good. No one wants to acknowledge that they've been abusive. So they will do a lot to defend themselves
Mm.
against that perception, even in themselves. So If you can't acknowledge it to yourself, there's no way they're going to acknowledge it to anyone else or to you.
Oh yeah, and something I've said in quite a few of my videos and so on. If they wouldn't change, if they wouldn't grasp it, if they wouldn't acknowledge it in the relationship, why do you think they're going to do it afterwards?
Exactly.
Yeah, and in fact, what you often find is that they start to double down. Again, that's where you get things like the smear campaigns and recruiting their little agents, flying monkeys, or the term I've heard recently, which I think is sounds a bit unkind, but fits the bill sometimes. They recruit their useful idiots.
Yeah. That's yeah.
And again, being social creatures, when it comes to things like those the smear campaigns and things like that, which is something else can keep people stuck, I believe. It's the fear of public opinion, the fear of other people's opinions.
Mm.
Are other people seeing me as the villain here?
They might.
Yeah, the truth is they
You
might.
know, they might. Sometimes I think you have to be okay with being the villain in someone else's story.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, sometimes that is how it's going to be. Um, but I think there's a real need. You know, we are social creatures, and our primary relationships, so particularly romantic partners, parents, or other very, very close relationship, they mean a lot to us. And
Mm,
so when something's going wrong, particularly when it's going really wrong and you've got abuse and then you've got, I think post-separation abuse is almost can
mm,
be just as severe, if not more severe in some cases than the abuse that was in a
yeah.
relationship. That they're real threats. We react to those. We can't not react. But I guess what I will often kind of say to people is you need to keep this in perspective because you can kind of almost get the impression when I step out my front door, the entire world is out there waiting to point the finger at me, waiting to see me in the worst possible light. The reality is, the vast majority of people, apart from those useful idiots, they don't care. They don't know and they don't care.
Mm.
And that's probably the better place to focus your attention. And that's not to say that the other stuff isn't painful,
Uh-huh.
and that in some cases, you know, and it's really difficult to talk about this, Darren, because I think it's so hard to talk in generalities,
Yeah.
right? Because you will get nasty rumor spreading, gossiping, you know, cryptic things on social media, people whispering, I'm concerned about her, I'm concerned about her mental health,
Mm,
you know, all that kind of crazy making. But then you also get the smear campaigns that are far more dangerous, which is the reputational damage, deliberately seeking to undermine someone's business, taking people to court over nothing, right? And those can be life destroying.
mm,
So there is a need. I mean, I'm kind of like in favor of the two extremes. Either you're going to have to accept you can't control what this other person does. You can't control what they say about you. You can't control who they talk to. You can't control the impression that they choose to have of you or that other people take from what they say. And so the best thing to do is nothing at all. You leave it. You can't deal with it. Get on with your own life. Pour your energy and attention into those other relationships. And remember, the vast majority of people don't know and don't care
mm.
what is being said about you. On the other side, it can be really serious. And when it's really, really serious, you need a lawyer.
So you're right.
Yes.
In cases like that, yeah, you need every resource you can get,
Mhm.
legal and otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, those are not the majority of cases, but I've come across them.
Mm.
And for
Thankfully,
the,
they are few and far between,
yeah, yeah.
but they are there.
Oh, yeah.
I think most of the time, what we talk about, the narcissist and things like that, most of the time, you just have someone who's very, very self-absorbed and very, very self-protective.
Yes.
A lot of the things they do, their smear campaigns or little actions and things like that, they're very poorly thought out. Now, it doesn't mean they're not hurtful, it doesn't mean they're not damaging, but they are just very poorly thought out. It's almost instant gratification. What makes me win in this moment?
It's also often impulsive. It's like, what's my impulsive thing I can do? to save my own reputation.
Mm,
So I'm seeing myself as in some way, I'm my sense of my own goodness, my reputation, what other people may think of me, may be in grave danger. And, narcissism is about fear of not being special,
mm,
fear of being ordinary. It is that everyone must adore me, everyone must admire me, everyone must see how powerful I am. And it has different flavors with different people, but that's the essence. It
mm,
is about reputation. It is about how you're seen and being admired by the right people. So that becomes a very dangerous person if you are saying, if you, what you have to say, what you have to do may reflect badly on them. So
mm,
if you are divorcing such a person or splitting up from them, or they've cheated on you, or they've been abusive to you and you decide that you've had enough, that has an impact on their reputation. And so they may react really strongly. And you can sometimes even see that people who actually have been okay in the relationship, maybe it's been a relationship with a higher level of conflict than normal, or you know, or one person's needed to be placated more than would be expected in a healthy relationship, but people wouldn't describe the relationship as abusive, right?
mm.
They will see good qualities in the
Podcast.
relationship, but on the point at which there's a separation,
Mm,
all hell breaks loose,
yeah.
you know?
There was something you said in one of your videos recently. You were talking about the flying monkeys, and you were saying about how a lot of the time when they're engaged in the smear campaign, they're going to other people. A lot of the time, it's trying to preempt what might be said about them.
Absolutely.
If I could add to that, it's not just to preempt what might be said about them. It's they're trying to put a version across. They're trying to put a version of what they think should be true.
Yeah, no, it is
Yeah, you
what they
know,
would like to be true.
what they would like to be true, the way they would like it to have been. That person, again, this person was abusive to me. If you were to drill down into that, what made them abusive, they wouldn't give me what I demanded. They didn't worship me the way I should be.
Yeah, I didn't get praise, I didn't get admiration,
Yeah.
or they didn't accept my help. I told them what they needed to do to improve themselves, and they didn't do it.
Yeah, I only ever wanted what was best.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm the helpless victim here. So yeah, it's creating a narrative in order to protect themselves.
yeah.
Something else that I've noticed comes up is again, whenever you're trying to reach someone, you're trying to get through someone, you're trying to reason with them. One of the things I believe that keeps people trying
Mm.
is every now and again they will do or say something, and it seems to sink in. They get it, they understand. And in that moment, they think, okay, I'm not going to say I've won, but yeah, okay, I'm reaching them, I'm getting through to them. The frustrating thing is that's very short-lived. And they feel as if they're back where they started again, and they have to try more because last time, yeah, got through, yeah, yeah,
It's really difficult as well to make sense of that sometimes,
yeah,
because sometimes the other party or you, you're in a particular mode, you're in a particular way of being at that point, which may make both of you more receptive, both of you more able to negotiate and collaborate. And then at other times they're in a different mode, or you're in a different mode, and they're really angry and they're very defensive, and they're in the mode where I've got to protect my reputation at all
yeah.
costs.
I protect my
Um,
ego, my sense of self, my worldview,
Absolutely.
all that.
So, that sort of changeability is really, really difficult to deal with because you just don't know what you're going to get. And so it's very hard to kind of be strategic. And I think you have to be as wise to it as you can.
Mm,
And again, you can't control the other person. So you kind of can only do your very best to stay as calm and act in your own best interest as best as possible, and to have a healthy degree of skepticism about anything, but also be willing, particularly, I mean, I see when couples go through divorce, be willing to negotiate and be willing to do things in good faith and be willing to, give the benefit of the doubt and create an atmosphere where the other person has every opportunity to be reasonable and to negotiate,
Mm.
whilst at the same time being very wise and not naive. And it's you need to do both. You need to not be naive, because I think sometimes people will watch my videos and I will talk about, staying calm, giving the benefit of the doubt, um, even being willing to use a little ego stroking.
Yeah.
Reassure the other person that you're not a threat to them. If they're very worried about reputational damage, maybe you say, look, I'm not going to share the details of your infidelities to everyone. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that to you. I'm not going to do that to our kids. I'm not going to do that to myself. Right? That may help to settle that kind of thing. And it's different for different people. I'm not saying that's what you
Yeah.
have to say or that that's always the situation, but to let the other person know that you are not deliberately going out to destroy their reputation, that
Mm.
in some ways you might even protect it.
To embarrass them or even shame them. Yeah.
Yeah, because that may calm things down. And then people say, well, screw that. Why should I do that? And I'm like, well, you know what? It's not for them.
Yeah.
Guess what? It's not for them. You're not going to say, because that puts me in a much better negotiating position, because that means I might get a better financial settlement, because I'm doing that for my kids and my own peace of mind. No, you may make it out that it's for them, but it's also for you. It's about what is in your best interest, what's going to give you peace of mind.
Yeah.
Because being on the I must get revenge, and I love a good revenge fantasy, right? I've had a few myself, Darren. But, you know, they often, those fantasies are often about helping ourselves to feel more powerful, helping ourselves feel like we have
Yeah.
some control in a situation where we completely out of control. But at the same time, I would say you've got to be thinking about the costs. I'll often talk about this with people who are going through divorces. Why should I settle? This is fundamentally unfair. And you have to say, that might be the case. And I'm not going to tell you to settle or not to settle, right? That's a decision for you, and it's a decision to have with discussion to have with your lawyer, not your therapist. But ask yourself, at what cost?
Mm.
At what cost? Because you've got to think about your own peace of mind. You've got to think about what brings this to an end for you, what helps you to get on with your life, what is going to bring you the things that are most important to you.
Yeah. Something I would sometimes say to people is about being able to think ahead.
Yeah.
Again, you mentioned earlier on about being impulsive and so on. And that phrase is, again, with narcissism in particular, it's very much in the here and now. What gets me what I want here and now? How
Mhm.
do I look like the alpha? How do I come out on top? How do I
Or
win?
look like the good guy,
Yeah, look like the good guy.
or the good father, or the good mother, or yeah,
Yeah. The ability to think a week ahead, a month ahead, even a year ahead. There's something quite powerful in that. Again, it's not necessarily we can do something in the here and now that fixes it or changes it or gets us what we want, but we're able to think ahead in the sense that what small step, what just one thing. I like to phrase it. What are you going to do today, or even first thing in the morning? You're going to thank yourself for maybe next year,
yeah,
regardless of how it feels in the moment.
yeah, for sure.
The thing I would say about this need to win to get some kind of you think of again movies, books, things like that. The good guys always win, and they usually win because of something they do. They overcome some kind of adversity. I think in real life, in order to win, you have to focus on yourself. You have to be able to think ahead. Some people call it karma. I prefer to call it the law of the harvest. You reap what you sow.
I wish that was always the case.
It's not always the case, but what I would say is it's not always the case in the short term. I'm talking about in the
Mm.
long term because it doesn't come overnight.
I would say as well that when you kind of think about those things, I caution people because there can be in the long term, he'll, justice will prevail.
Mhm.
And I think, you're right. People will reap what they sow, right? Especially when it comes to relationships.
Mhm.
Um, but I would say focus on what you're sowing,
Yeah.
because that quest for justice and the desire for justice can often actually stop you building the life you really want to have. It's a
Mhm.
bit like the prison doors are open.
Mhm.
Don't stay and fight the guard.
Yeah.
You know?
That's a very good way of putting it. You're right. We focus on ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to do where we would like to be. I say about them reaping what they sow, justice isn't always what we think it is.
No.
And we think it's, again, we read in stories, we watch movies and so on. Sometimes it's the justice, sooner or later, people do get to see them as they really are. Because
Oh, yeah.
you can't hide it forever.
You know, I would also say the best revenge is living well.
Oh, yeah.
You've got to think often to, where do you want to be in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years? Because that's where you want to sow,
Yeah.
and I think that's hard sometimes to get your head around, because it's like there isn't justice, and I can't change the way you can't change the way your abusive ex-partner is going to be. You can't change them, and you may be stuck with them because you might have children together, so they may well be in your life, whether
There's
you
some
like
kind
it
of contact.
in
Yeah.
some form, yeah. However, you can have some agency, and I say that carefully, Darren, because I think for most people there's a degree of agency. You can do that. It's not always the case. People can be stuck in abusive relationships, whether financially or
Depending.
physically,
Yeah.
under so much threat that to get out is impossible, or they fear for their safety or the safety of their children. And
Hmm.
there are people who are so abusive, and where there's so much coercion and so much control, that there is a risk of escalating physical violence and even homicide
Yeah.
in the event of someone leaving. So I say it carefully because I don't want to come across as overly simplistic and say, well, we all have a choice, because we don't all have a choice, or we don't all have equal choices. That's just not reality. But I think often people have more agency than they realize.
Yeah.
you know and of course, I'm not also saying that if you are in a situation where you're fearing for your own life, that there's nothing you can do. But in those instances, you need to be in touch with the domestic violence
Yeah.
organizations and the police, law enforcement in your particular area, to figure out how to get out safely.
Even in relationships where there is a lot of coercion and control, there's a lot of isolating takes place.
Yes. Yes.
And in those very, very abusive, violent relationships, because there's been a lot of isolating, there might be checking phones, there might be, who are you talking to? And, there's a lot of stuff going on, all about control. You utilize every bit of support. Your agency is you don't have to go through it alone.
Mm, absolutely. And I would also suggest to people, use your work phone,
Mm,
use your friend's phone. If you got to take steps to cover your tracks, take them.
yeah.
You know, um, I think that's really, really essential. And I think also in the UK there are things you can do. There are like places you can go where you can actually make a call to the police, to
Mm.
Women's Aid. I think, is it Ask for Annie? The Ask for Annie campaign in the UK.
Oh yeah, I'd heard about that. Was really clever that. I thought
Yeah,
that was a really good,
yeah,
it's a really good idea. Little things like that.
yeah,
Yeah. It does take sometimes a little bit of research to find out these things, but once you get them,
yeah,
use them.
yeah. Yeah, and I think the other thing, what I think is really important, is that investing in other relationships, because abusive relationships and controlling relationships do tend to be very isolating,
Yeah.
and they tend to make you think everyone else is judging you, or is out to get you, or is abusive to
Hmm.
you. And I think really investing in other relationships and other friendships
Yeah. The
is
antidote,
really important.
any kind of abuse, trauma, things like that, it tends to disconnect us.
Yeah,
We feel disconnected. The obvious antidote, if you want to call it out, is actually connection. We start to
yeah,
connect with others, maybe even reconnect
yeah.
with people we lost contact with.
People are often very pleasantly surprised at
Mm,
people's reactions to attempts to reconnect. You know, because people are often very pleased to hear from them. And sometimes people have realized there's something not great going on.
yeah.
That's not unusual at all. So, I think that reconnections can be really, really powerful as are building new connections. And even when you're in it, finding the little moments and the little pockets of connection with other people, even if that's just having a coffee with your work friends,
Mm,
is can be just so rebuilding.
yeah.
You just notice that contrast of what it's like to be treated respectfully, what it's like to be treated with even a little bit of kindness, a little bit of human decency. I
Yeah.
think it's really, really good for you.
Something I like to say to people as well is you pay attention to those little things because,
Yeah.
again, sometimes we can be stuck in that place. But if we pay attention to the little small changes,
Yeah.
even when we're out of it, we might find we change our hairstyle, or
Mm.
we start listening to a different kind of music, or, we're talking to different kinds of people. If we're not paying attention to those little small subtle
Yeah.
changes, that's us getting to know ourselves again.
Yeah. For sure. And I think it's about letting them in, because we often those
Yeah.
things are really hard to let in if you're constantly being bombarded with you're not good enough, you're inadequate, you failed, you're a crap partner, you're whatever the message may be. It's so hard to let in those other things. So you kind of have to be really intentional about it. And and I think often when people have I mean, I love working with people when they've just left those kinds of relationships, because it's like, okay, now you get to explore. You get to do a whole rebuilding thing where you get to go out, get to meet new people, you get to reconnect with old people that you've known before. You get to rekindle those relationships and friendships, and you got to drink all of that in. You
Yeah.
kind of got to let it absorb. So you start to it changes the way you see yourself. It changes the way you see relationships. And whether that's just after you've left, or sometimes it's years after you've left, that you actually start to let those things in again.
Yeah. And something I think people find helpful, at least I hope they do. We're not looking for something to be easy.
No, it's not
Sometimes
easy.
it isn't. But what we do is we ask ourselves what would make it just a little bit easier, just
Yeah,
a little bit easier. That could be anything.
you can. I think I'm a big believer in starting small.
Hmm.
It's totally fine if your first reconnection with the world is just to say good morning to the person who makes your coffee when you're away to work, you know, but let that seep in. Like, you know what? They smiled. You know what?
Yeah.
They said good morning to me. You know what? They remembered what my order always is and they made it for me.
Yeah.
Like let it in.
Um, and even somebody in work that includes you in something, somebody in work, they've had a really good weekend. They had some really good news and they're sharing it with everyone. Feel
Mm,
pleased for them.
yeah.
And you'll notice these things starting to be reciprocated.
Yeah.
The day that someone brings in a box of donuts or something, yeah, get tucked in the same as everybody else. There's no conditions. They're for
Mhm.
everyone.
Yeah.
Those little small things. I like when we pay attention to those kind of things, we're paying attention to the exceptions
Mm,
because we can get into a mindset, it's always this, it's never that.
mm.
When we pay attention to those little small exceptions, I think they help us along our path to, you want to call it recovery. Yeah, help us along our path
Well,
to recovery.
they start to change your view of yourself,
Yeah.
and they start to change your view of other people. And so in turn, they change your view of relationships. You know, so, it is, I think it is eminently possible to do that. It's not easy. Nothing worth doing is easy, right?
Just as I say, what
Mm.
makes it easier? Just a
Yeah,
little bit.
and it's how can you do it gradually? And also, sometimes you got to be up for the challenge.
Mm,
I'm kind of thinking about situations where Actually, one of the hardest things I think is boundaries, how having boundaries after an abusive relationship, because people either are so used to being so pleasing and placating, they continue in that pattern. And for a healthier relationship, that doesn't go well because the other person's like, "Well, what do you want? I don't know where I stand. I don't want to be pleased all the time." Um, so that can often, attract exactly who you don't want to attract. Or
Mm.
people go the other extreme. No one's ever going to mess with me again.
Yeah.
Boundaries. You put sugar in my coffee and I said I didn't take sugar. Boundaries. So disrespectful. And I'm kind of exaggerating, but
No,
that,
I get what you mean.
you know what I mean? It's like, okay, we're overshooting. We got to pull it back. And
Yeah.
kind of, I think also learn how to do conflict and how to do arguments and how to do disagreements and differences of
Yeah.
opinion.
So I said earlier, it's the art of negotiation,
Absolutely.
trade-off.
Those are the things that often people find hard,
And
especially as relationships get close again, where you
yeah, and
get,
as we start to meet other people, as we start to get involved with other people, again, when we start to pay attention, we can notice that our boundaries can be flexible in different situations. We will let a kid off with things we wouldn't let an adult off with, so there's a flexibility there. So we learn they don't have to be set in stone, but nor do they have to be so wide open that people can tread all over them. We fear speaking up.
yeah. I like to think of boundaries as being more like doors than walls. So you
Mm,
don't have to have walls up, but there are times you want to close the door. And there's also times you want to open the door.
yeah.
And there are people to whom you give the spare key, and there are people to whom you don't even answer the door when they knock. It's and there may be different times where you're more open than others, and I think there is that natural ebb and flow in relationships that is actually really important
Yeah,
for us and other people.
absolutely. Well, I would thank you for joining me today. There's been some really good info there, and I hope people watching, listening, learn something useful.
No, thank you for having me. An honor to be your
No,
first podcast guest.
yes, I'm not a natural interviewer, but thanks again for joining me. And you know what? So as I said it before when I was on your channel, be nice to do this again sometime.
Absolutely. I'll look forward to it.